Welcome, Owen. Hi, Lance.
Hi, Owen.
Good morning, Bruce.
Hi, Owen. Hi, Lance.
Okay.
Why? I don't know. You're new
Blake?
here.
Sorry, Blake.
Yeah, Dennis asked me to come on this morning to help with the discussion on Amendment B.
Thank you very much, Clay, for coming. We do appreciate it. We're all looking to increase our understanding of this important amendment.
Thank you.
So just very briefly, should we get started?
Please, because
Absolutely.
I know, Dennis, your time is short, correct? You
Yes,
have to
I've got
leave.
another meeting in the neighborhood at a little coffee shop. We're all going to wear our masks. And we're discussing why we should vote no on the Amendment B. And the thing I'd point out to you in the blue book, this pretty much worthless blue book, is that I want you to just listen to what it says. Here's the ballot title. Without increasing property taxes, comma, to help preserve funding for local districts that provide all kinds of various services, shall there be amendment to the Colorado Constitution to repeal the requirement that the General Assembly periodically change the residential assessment rate in order to maintain the statewide proportion of residential property as compared to all the other taxable property valued for property tax purposes. Long sentence. But I just want to say that they say they're not going to raise your taxes, and yet it says without increasing property tax rates, which Clay will explain in a minute. So here they're saying they're not going to raise your taxes, and yet they go on and list all the things they want to raise to give tax money to. So and I hope that when you vote on this, friends, that you will remember what the Democratic Party is supposed to be standing up for, and that's the working people, the lower income people, and the elderly. When I was in the legislature, I was often criticized because I would always try to look for, on behalf of my neighborhood here in North Denver, we would talk about all the older people on fixed incomes. And when you're on a fixed income, that in a time of inflation like we're living in now, that's a declining income. So this is a tax increase. Don't drink the Kool-Aid. Don't believe it. And they could have done a lot better on how to repair the Gallagher Amendment. I know there are some issues with it, but they just wanted to throw the baby out with the bathwater. This is a tax increase, and Clay is going to explain how it's a $203 million tax increase the first year. Remember the elderly, remember the working people, remember the lower income people, remember the minority people who are not as blessed as we and able to afford these higher property taxes. So that's my opening pitch. You go on then.
Yeah, I mean, I assume this group all understands the Gallagher Amendment, or would you like me to start there and work my way through it from there, or just the amendment itself?
I think the amendment.
Okay, well, what this amendment does is that it repeals the Gallagher Amendment, and it sets property tax rates as they currently sit at 29% for business, 7.15% for homeowners. What that does is it gives homeowners, the difference in what the tax rate would be now versus what it will be in next year when they reassess your property tax. Joanne Groff, the tax administrator for the state of Colorado, has estimated back in June, that if Amendment B passes, that will effectively mean $203.7 million more that residential property owners will be paying than they otherwise would. And that $203.7 million is an every year amount going forward and only increases from there. So over the course of 5 years, we're talking about $1.02 billion more in property taxes than residential and homeowners will pay than they otherwise would. And that's the real key with Amendment B, is that they've written it very cleverly, because they talk about tax rates. They don't talk about actual dollars out of your pocket. And if Amendment B actually solved a problem, then maybe there would be an argument for doing this. But what Amendment B does is it only deals with half of the issues that we have in Colorado. It only deals with the Gallagher Amendment. It doesn't deal with the Tabor issues. So when they repeal this, because of Tabor, the legislature won't be able to raise tax rates. They can only lower them. So what this does is it takes off the constitutional amendment that sets the 55% for non-residential property tax, 45% for residential, which gives them an opportunity to start lowering property tax on oil and gas and on big businesses. And it doesn't raise a single more dollar than is already being raised. So in these tough economic times, I saw today in the Colorado Sun, 245,000 people are on unemployment in the state of Colorado since the start of the pandemic. And at this point in time, this is the wrong time to start doing a regressive tax that hits homeowners and also then effectively hits renters as well, as it takes its shot at affordable housing and how much rents will be. And the Apartment Association of the Front Range and the Colorado Apartment Association have both said that if Amendment B passes, they expect rents along the Front Range to continue going up, that this will have an opposite effect on being able to provide affordable housing. So for these reasons, the fact that 33% of the people nationwide in August couldn't pay their mortgages on time or in full, that 245,000 Coloradans are on unemployment right now. This is the wrong time to be doing a tax hike for people in Colorado. This is a wrong time to be taking off the reins to allow the legislature to start doing tax breaks for businesses. I understand that small mom and pop retail is getting killed by the property tax. But I've been doing politics in Colorado for 35 years. And the one thing I know for sure is that when tax breaks start happening, they don't happen for small mom and pop operations. Tax breaks go to oil and gas companies. Tax breaks go to big business in the form of incentives to bring Amazon here. Or I remember when we tried to bring United Airlines here. So taking the reins off to allow tax breaks for big businesses doesn't make any sense now either. And that's really all this does, is it makes sure that homeowners pay more than they otherwise would, and it gives the legislature the opportunity to reduce tax rates on non-residential property. So I'll stop right there and take any questions or anybody wants to talk about this.
Okay, Ruth? Unmic, Ruth, your mic.
Thank you. So isn't it true that property tax rates in Colorado are ridiculously low compared to states in the rest across the country? Having lived in many of those states, certainly that's been my personal experience. Secondly, isn't it also true that wealthy homeowners and second homeowners disproportionately benefit from this? And finally, where's the money supposed to, in this desperate budget situation, where's the money supposed to come from for basic services to Coloradans? And that includes low and moderate income folks and people on fixed incomes.
Okay, well, starting from the top, Colorado ranks about 40th in the nation as it relates to property tax. So you're right. Our property tax on residential is lower than the majority of states. Our average, in New Jersey, the average house property tax is $8,900. The specific reason Gallagher was passed in 1982 was to ensure that we wouldn't get to that place where you were basically having a second mortgage on your home just to pay your property tax. And over the course of that, it's saved homeowners in Colorado since 1982 about $35 billion. I agree with you that we need to have a tax rate that doesn't penalize low-income people as opposed to high-income people. We already have a regressive tax rate in Colorado. People who make over $250,000 spend about 1.4% of their income on their housing. People who make under $20,000 spend about 2.8% of their income on housing. So we already have a regressive tax rate in Colorado. And in these tough times, there's other ways that you can raise monies to go forward. We've known since Tabor passed in the early 90s that we have a tax crisis in Colorado, that we have to deal with a comprehensive tax reform in this state. And I've known Dennis for 30 years. And for the last 20 years, he specifically has gone out there saying he would lead the charge to repeal the Gallagher Amendment if it was part of overall comprehensive tax policy. But that if we're going to go after the only tax break that working people in this state have, the only time that they have an opportunity to actually keep their taxes low, and we aren't going to go after all the other places where we give tax breaks to big businesses, everything from oil well tax subsidies down to the fact that we subsidize bull semen with a tax break for farmers. I mean, there's a whole slew, 82 different places where we have codified tax breaks, and we aren't going after that. To go after the one place that will hurt working men and women most, because we're in a short-term tax issue because of the pandemic, it's taking a sledgehammer to a mosquito. If we really, I agree with you, we have serious issues in Colorado, but saying that the way to go after them is to go after people who are being hurt most in this economic downturn in the pandemic, it's unconscionable. That is not the way to go after and do it. And I think that the legislature had a whole slew of things that they could do, from repealing the entire tax code down to finding different ways to do mill levies in different areas. But they didn't do that. They decided to go after the Gallagher Amendment. They did deceiving language that makes it sound like your taxes, that you're going to pay the same amount that you always would, and it doesn't hurt you. And the tax administrator says it's $203.7 million more. That's wrong. Tax reform needs to take place. This kind of tax reform is regressive and is the worst kind of tax reform.
So the Denver Democrats and the Colorado Fiscal Institute, both of whom are urging to vote yes on Amendment B, they're
Yes.
misguided. They don't understand the impact of it.
The language on this is without adjusting your tax rate. And I can only tell you what the tax administrator of the state says it's going to be. And that's $203.7 million from residential property owners. That's not my saying it. That's her saying it. You have to decide whether or not, in the midst of a pandemic, with almost 250,000 Coloradans on unemployment, when people can't afford to do their mortgages, is this the time that we should be balancing the budget on the backs of homeowners? That's for you to decide. My answer on that is no. It's there's bipartisan support for both yes and no on this.
Okay. Other questions?
If I could just chime in again one more time. I was listening to the news the other day, and 11,000 people in Jefferson County, our county right next to us, had trouble paying their property taxes. This is going to bring on worse time. And Owen knows exactly the pressure that's going to be on the legislature to give special tax breaks to special. I'm surprised the Olympics group hasn't jumped up and wanted to have more tax breaks so that they could bring the Olympics here. And so I just hope that when you make your decision on this, there's a better way to go. I know exactly what you said, and I felt it, but also I've tried to look out for people in Colorado who are not on the top income, who can afford to hire all the high-powered Brownstein, Hyatt, and Farber lobbyists that come down and inundate the legislature with their sob stories. So I want to thank all of you for letting Clay and I come and give our pitch. Hope you'll study this, hope you'll think about it, and hope you'll go with the no.
Does anyone else have questions?
Thank you, Dennis.
You
Jim?
betcha.
I just wanted to say thank you to Dennis and Clay
Okay.
for being here.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks, Jim.
Did Everett raise his hand?
John?
Everett?
Yes, I've heard that in rural areas, because there aren't that many businesses, Gallagher affects hospitals and services. Can you address that?
There is no question that Gallagher has a negative impact on the rural parts of the state and that it hits them harder. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that that is not the case. But what I can tell you is that for the vast majority of Coloradans, it has had a positive effect on keeping residential property taxes low. I'm not arguing that we don't need serious comprehensive tax reform. What I'm arguing is that nobody over the course of the last 20 years, almost 30 years that Tabor has been in place, has gone after and tried to do that. And until we do that, there's going to continue to be inequities. There's always going to be the examples of how things are the abuses of the system. People with second homes, more wealthy people who have bigger homes who aren't paying a proportionate share more. There's always those kinds of issues. The only thing I can apply myself to is 2020 and Amendment B. And I think that it's a shame that they wrote the language specifically to deceive people that this wasn't going to be more money out of their pockets than it otherwise would. I mean, if you'd like, I'll share on the screen the actual graph from the tax administrator that shows the $203.7 million next year. All I can apply myself to is right now, in a pandemic, in one of the biggest economic downturns in this country's history, with a commander-in-chief in Washington who continues to make it worse, and businesses in Colorado who are being hurt. I get all of that, but I can't see how you go forward and penalize the people who are being hurt most. It's not the people in the multi-million-dollar homes in the country club who are going to have trouble paying the extra amount than they otherwise would. But for people in North Denver, where Dennis is from, a huge number of people who have had their homes for 30 or 40 years and can stay in those homes because their residential property tax stays low. If it doesn't, in this kind of economic downturn, and those people can't afford to now pay their mortgages, like I said, 33% of the people across the country in August didn't pay it on time or in full. So you have to take those kind of numbers and put it against it. If you're in North Denver and you can't afford to stay in your home, if you have to sell your home, how do you ever stay in Denver right now? There's no affordable housing in Denver. So all I can do is apply myself to what's going on right now. Do we need to think about and deal with the rural areas of the state? Yes, we do. Does Amendment B do anything to change that inequity? No, it doesn't. And so until we start applying ourselves to the real issue, how do we go forward? I don't have the answer for you. All I can say is right now.
So how should we vote?
Vote no.
Jim Chaney. Jim, turn on your mic.
Thank you. Yeah, I saw that chat question from Helen about polling. Is there polling on this? I came in a few minutes late, so maybe that's already been addressed.
The only polling I saw was very early on. And there were two questions on it. One was they just read the amendment language, and at that point in time, it had I think it had a 34% positive response on that, 20% against it. Once it was explained on it, of the 30 middle 30s that were supportive of it, 50% dropped off at that point in time. If people understand that this is a tax increase, that they will pay more in property tax than they otherwise would, it's dead. Last time we did, one last thing. Last time we did this this same election was in 1992. And Dennis spent $2,000 to defeat this thing, and it went down 80-20.
Okay. Owen?
Or I'll answer Everett's question right now if you want me to.
Sure.
Or Everett's question about the Tabor Amendment. This is the brilliancy of how they wrote Amendment B. It doesn't change your property tax rate from where it is right now. So you'll only pay what you're continuing to pay right now, except of course your assessed value goes up. So the same assessment rate against a higher assessment value means you'll pay more. The thing with Amendment B is that it takes away the reduction you'd otherwise get with Gallagher. And that's where the $203.7 million more from homeowners than they'd otherwise pay comes from.
Okay. Owen?
No, that is actually incorrect, because Everett is correct. There cannot be a tax increase in the rate without a Tabor election. What this does is it holds everything where it is right now. It keeps non-residential at their rate. It keeps residential at their rate. You can't increase without a Tabor election. But once Gallagher is gone, the legislature can decrease rates, and all of those lobbyists and all those all the money that's thrown at politics will now have an opportunity to do something that they haven't been able to do for the last 38 years. They've been able to find tax loopholes for individual businesses, but they haven't been able to lower the tax rate. Now they can.
And if I could just add that Colorado counties came out and against this, and the reason they, even though they're elected officials too, all the county commissioners, and there's a division of opinion among them, but they were worried about the swarms, like Thomas Jefferson said in the Declaration against King George. King George has sent hither swarms of officers to eat us out of our store. That's exactly what's going to happen at the legislature. Do you think anybody's going to be hired to be down there for the homeowners and the renters and the middle income people? No, it'll all be for the rich, and the rich are going to make out like bandits on this. They could have delayed the enactment of the residential assessment rate. They could have delayed that and kept everything just level the way it is. But they didn't want to do that. They wanted to create sort of a storm here that they're now playing on. So hope you'll consider a no vote.
John Ferguson? Your mic, John.
How's that, better?
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. I don't understand why it is that my taxes, not my tax rate. I have no idea what the tax rate is. My taxes have more than doubled in the last 20 years.
Yep.
What's that about? This is supposed to be keeping it equal or something like that.
Well, your tax assessment rate has actually gone down. I don't know where you live, but the assessed value of your house has been going up, and that's what your taxes you're paid are based on two things. One is the assessed value of your house, and then that's put against what the assessment rate is. So your tax rate has actually decreased over the course of the same period of time, but it's been offset by both mill levies that the city or county has put on there in addition to that and through votes, or it's the assessed value that has gone up against that assessment
You
rate.
said Tabor did not allow them to increase the mill levy.
Without a vote of the people.
Oh, okay. So the people of Denver have voted to increase the mill levy.
Yeah, they have. Denver has been very generous on school items and various other items. You see where they've been very generous partly because Gallagher has kept the taxes low, so they feel they can go ahead and raise their tax rates a little bit with a special election. And that's exactly what's happened. But you're right, John. And what do you do if you're older and you're in your final years? If you sell your house, where are you going to go? In Denver, the average prices of homes, or anybody here know anybody that's not a millionaire that can buy in North Denver? I mean, I got houses near me that are going for $1 million too. You can't believe it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Welcome to a good economy, I suppose. But that's the downside, is that we have not done anything for affordable housing. And Amendment B kills affordable housing and the opportunity to do that.
Well, it's not affordable anyway. I mean,
Right.
What is affordable, I guess, is the question.
Yeah.
for a person who makes an average income, it's nowhere near affordable, not even to have a rental.
That's
The
right.
prices of housing in Denver are completely out of control.
Yeah, and I don't see any change in that with the current administration and the current council. I don't think they're going to change it.
You know, there are all sorts of different tax options that the legislature can go after if they do whole tax policy. They don't have to treat every kind of non-residential property tax the same. They don't have to treat the strip centers that have mom and pop businesses in them at the same assessment rate that they treat oil and gas, or that they treat, the big corporations going out near DIA. I mean, there is no sliding scale on this. It's A or it's B. And that's part of the problem also, is that when Gallagher first was passed in 1982, that made some sense. Our economy has changed where it doesn't, but you can't just change one side of this. As Everett was noting, there's three pieces to it. Amendment 23, it's Tabor, it's Gallagher. And until our elected officials, that's the thing that when we first got into this campaign, we talked to the people of Colorado Concern, who represent all the big businesses in Colorado. And we talked about the biggest problem we have, not that we can beat this back, because the minute people understand it's a tax rate, they vote no. But it's the political capital that's being spent on an ill-advised amendment. We need everybody on board to try and change all the tax policy. We need Dennis Gallagher out there saying it's time to repeal the Gallagher Amendment because we're doing overall tax policy. That's how we get to equity. That's how we treat our rural areas of the state better. But when we squander that political capital of honesty by writing an amendment that deceives the voters in the very first sentence, and B, does what they don't tell them it does, that's a problem. That's bad governing. And that's how we get ourselves in this problem to start with. We don't trust our elected officials. And Amendment B proves why.
Okay.
Well,
Thank you.
I've got to go to my next meeting, but thank you for being such good citizens and for talking about things. Thank you for even considering a no vote. And I hope you will. I know there's a much better way to do this. Let's just hold firm. And this is the Jewish New Year. Hazak, that means be strong in Hebrew. So Happy New Year, everybody. And let's hope to the Lord it is. And a great joy to be with you. And I have to go back with my mask now to the coffee shop. And you keep fighting those Olympics. I'm surprised the Olympics haven't got something on the ballot. Try to get more money out of us on that one. So joy to be with you, and we'll see you. Bye. Thanks, Clay. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dennis.
I'll
Shabbat
stay on
shalom.
if you want me to. If you're done listening to me preach at you, I'll get off. It's totally up to you all.
Clay, I think it would be great. Everett had a question about 23. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, those are the three sort of pillars of tax policies. 23 requires that a certain percentage be attributed to education. Tabor holds that the biggest issue that we have in tax policy on the state is Tabor, because Tabor, in good times, if you bring in more money than you initially did when the tax rate first came in, you can't keep it unless you get a vote of the people. So when the economy turns bad and the taxes get repressed on this, Tabor keeps you down there and you can't recover it in the good times. That combined with Gallagher, which holds the percentage, combined with 23, which holds the amount that goes to specifically designated on there, creates an issue where we can't do what we need to for a state. We're not nimble enough.
Okay, Stu, and then John.
Oh, as it's been going, I've been piling up things. Let me keep them in order. First, I want to make sure I understand. You say the language is deceitful, but there's something that I want to make sure. Everything I'm hearing has a fear-based, your taxes are going to go up, your taxes are going to go up. But unless I'm wrong, what's happening is $203 million in savings, in other words, going down, is just not going to happen. Do I understand that correctly?
That you are absolutely correct.
Okay,
but
here we are.
It's not about tax rate. It's about money out of your pocket.
No, but the saying you're going to pay $203 million more relative to what I'm now paying is false.
It's not that
miss the opportunity to save that. Is that correct?
It's two things. One, it's the 203.7 that you otherwise wouldn't have to pay. So yes, your rate will stay exactly where it is right now.
Okay, so let me finish my question. So it's a little bit misleading to say you're going to pay more. We're not going to pay more. We're going to pay what we're paying now, going
except for your assessed rate goes up. So you will pay more.
But that can happen anytime. That's independent of this.
That's independent of this, but that's what part of what Gallagher is intended to do.
But again, that can happen any year. That's not tied to this. My second question, which I should have written them all down, but my next question is, so it sounds like what you're saying is getting rid of part of these three isn't good unless you can do it all. Except it's my understanding is these were constructed to make it very hard. They're tangled. In other words, I don't see any way we're going to get rid of all three because you're saying if you can't do it perfectly, don't do any of it. Am I hearing that right?
What I'm saying is that you have to go. The way that you can do it is you can do it as the same kind of repeal that we're talking about right now, but you have to repeal all the pieces. And what I'm saying is that
you talk about comprehensive reform. I'm asking you a personal question. Would you be happy if there was no comprehensive reform and we just kept doing what we're doing?
Am I happy? No, I want our legislature to do something. But what I don't want them to do is to place, the burden that's going, there's one reason to do this. If it was all about just holding everything steady, well, they could have, as Dennis noted, they could have put off the new assessments until we got past the current economic downturn. There's one reason to do Amendment B, and that's to take away the 29% on non-residential, to be able to do tax cuts for big businesses. And yes, could it be for small businesses as well? Well, if you had the lobbyists and you put the money forward to go up at the Capitol, then maybe you could do that. But the reality is, and maybe I'm a total cynic on this, but the reality is that I've never seen the legislature move on things that didn't benefit big business first. And so what this does is there's only one reason to do this. It's to do tax cuts and to make it up by not allowing homeowners to get their tax cut on this. So yes, if you want to look at it that way as a tax cut, yes, then the 203.7 would be less taxes that you would have to pay. So you are going to pay that, but you're paying the same amount so business can pay less.
Fine. So I'm just going to close by saying you talk about the pandemic a lot. We're in a very difficult situation, huge deficits, big problems. lowering revenue at this point doesn't seem to make sense to me. In other words, if all we're saying is hold it where it is. And then the second thing is I moved here 6 years ago. I'll be really honest. When I moved here from Philadelphia, I had no idea about Tabor or any of this stuff. And when I heard about it, I said, why do we have legislatures? Why bother electing these people? Because there's an inherent lack of trust. 49 other states don't do this. And somehow, some of them do worse, some of them do better, but they don't tie the hands of their legislatures this way. To me, it was like I walked into Oz, the land of Oz. It's just, I could not understand that.
Stuart, if you want to at some point in time, I can tell you the 3 previous times Doug Bruce tried to push Tabor, and he got assurances that the public got assurances, don't do this, we're going to take care of it. You don't have to tie our hands and do this kind of amendment that, as you know, takes away the power of the legislature. And they did nothing. And so ultimately he kept coming back because the promises to do something never occurred.
That was 30 years ago, right?
Yeah, that was 30 years ago.
Did we have cell phones back then?
I'm not a supporter of Tabor, so I'm not going to sit here and defend anything. I'm here to defend one thing, and that is that the homeowners of this state have one institutionalized tax break. It's the only one that the average person gets in this state, and that's Gallagher. And I think that trying to balance the budget on the backs of homeowners is a bad thing to do.
Okay. John, and then Blake.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment about Amendment 23, which supposedly guarantees that a certain percentage increase in the taxes every year will go to schools. The truth of the matter is that doesn't happen. Every year, the legislature passes an appropriation bill for schools that sets the target in order to meet the requirements of Amendment 23. And then they do the number one line item underneath that, which is to create a hole in the tax allotment that reduces it to the amount that they really want to appropriate. And that has been accumulating every year now for, I don't know, maybe 10 years. I have no idea how much is in that, quote, savings account, unquote, that we owe our schools. But it is not true that amendment has protected the appropriations for schools at all. It's another example, Clay, of the lying you talk about our legislature engaging in.
And that's, it's one of the problems is that if you aren't honest with people, and if you go forward and say, listen, you'd pay less, but we have a problem right now. And so we need you to pay more than you otherwise would have, because we do have an issue and all this stuff going on. I think the voters are sympathetic and understanding of that kind of stuff when you're honest about it. But I think doing what they do with 23 and this phantom, savings account that at some point in time we're going to have to fund back up, that pushing a thing by saying, and using using the tricky term of rates rather than dollars out of your pocket to get around the idea that you're going to pay more than you otherwise would have. And I would assume that all of us are being hurt by the pandemic and the downturn. So, yeah, this is money that we'd already pay anyway if rates stayed set. But this is a bad time, an economic time, and people need that break.
Okay.
It's
Blake?
always a bad time, and we can always say that we can't raise taxes, and we don't want to raise taxes on the backs of homeowners. We don't want to raise taxes on the backs of anybody else. Somehow, that's the excuse for not raising taxes, and that's part of the problem we have right now. We need more money, and for get more money, everybody's going to have to do it, and it's going to have to be on the backs of everybody. We do need it more, and I think that I just feel that this is disingenuous to talk about let's protect homeowners, because that's me. And so, but there's somebody else who's going to pay for this. But somehow, when we get down to it, finally, we're all going to have to pay. And I think we have to be more honest about the fact that this is a burden that goes on all of us. And playing games like this, it just seems to me to be unfair and dishonest.
Well, and Blake, I appreciate where you're at on that. I guess I would look at this as that if you want homeowners to pay more generally, because there are people who have second homes and there are people who have multi-million-dollar homes versus people who have $100,000 bungalows, then you could have put forward an amendment that talked about a sliding scale or brought into account all of these things. But if you're going to bring a sledgehammer to trying to kill a temporary downturn, then you have to own it on both sides. You have to own the people.
Every hammer is not a sledgehammer. I think that we overstate some of these points. So I think that we just need to be careful about how we talk to each other honestly about our mutual responsibilities.
And I agree that I'm in the business of rhetoric, and so I'm putting it out in much in the same way that the people who have crafted Amendment B are in the business of rhetoric and have not been honest about what it actually does. All I do is look at I go back to Joanne Groff, the tax administrator of the state of Colorado, and her talking to the committee at the state in June, and she presented the $203.7 million that would be raised at 7.15%, which wouldn't be raised at what she projected at that point in time to be a 5.88%, which is where under Gallagher residential property rates would go. That's all I can hang my hat on.
Okay. Anybody else? Stu, yeah.
I have a small one again, because I'm 6 years new to this. Is it true that this trifecta of, the amendment and Gallagher and Tabor prevents us from ever having a rainy day fund? So in other words, many other states have rainy day funds. We're now in a mess, okay? And we don't have a Fed, we can't print dollars. There's all the things we can't do. Sure, my heart says I'd love to give something to the poor people, but we don't have it to give, So I guess my question is, your concept of a rainy day fund. I mean, is that something we should have? Many other states have it, and they're not doing as poorly now, and they're not as strapped as we are.
And I think that you've just brought us back in circle to Tabor, because that's exactly what Tabor does. Is that in bad times you get hurt, and in most states, good times and bad times economically even out. And the deficits that you run in bad times, when good times come, you can take the extra money and you can fund it back up. You can build a rainy day fund. Tabor doesn't allow that. It's not that Gallagher doesn't allow that. Tabor's what doesn't allow that. And this is
tricky. Is they're so tied. I guess the difference is, on one level, I'm sympathetic to what you're saying. Let's get rid of all three. On another level, it's like, no, let's do what we can now. The next year, do another thing. Then the next year, do another thing. Things going for the grand slam as opposed to hitting a bunch of doubles and singles and triples. I'll take the doubles and singles and triples.
And I guess I would argue that in that situation, that the first thing that needs to go is Tabor. That you don't take away homeowners. You don't take away the one thing that helps homeowners stay in their home and pay low taxes. You go after the overall reaching things, the amendment that prevents it from being able to go after. That prevents you from being able to get better when in good times and compensate. So
you're putting a lot of time helping us decide to vote against this amendment. What work is happening to get rid of Tabor?
From an outsider's standpoint on that, I don't see anything being done to do that.
But you're willing to put your personal time and energy into this. Are you putting time and energy into getting rid of Tabor? Well, I don't mean to be personal. I'm just saying I put a lot of time into stuff, and I don't have infinite time. I got to decide where to put it.
Okay. The first thing I want you all to understand is I'm not a hired gun on this. I'm not being paid one penny on this. So I'm quote unquote running the campaign as it exists. We're a dollars and cents kind of campaign. We're not a multi-million-dollar campaign that the other side is claiming that they're going to forward on this. So what am I doing personally? I've been working with Dennis Gallagher and opening opportunities for the last 20 years for him to talk to Colorado Concern and other groups on this to try and push the idea of comprehensive tax reform. That he'll be, as the named guy on the amendment, him getting out and saying that the Gallagher Amendment, it's time to get rid of it, would make a huge difference. And he has said he's willing to do that. And I've tried to work with him to give him opportunities to pitch. Let's do it all. Let's go after this. Let's show a broad front. And nobody has ever taken him up on that. And so I think, once again, if you're going to start somewhere, this isn't the place. And for sure, this isn't the time. And that's, I can't apply myself an Amendment B to taper. All I can say is that in a pandemic, with so many people out of work, with an economic downturn, taking away for people who are just barely staying in their houses, whatever that percentage is, versus the people who are in multi-million-dollar houses, they didn't give me the opportunity to say, hey, let's tax those people more versus these people. They've made it all or nothing. And all I can say is, in these economic times, now's not the time to do this. Start where you should.
Okay. Owen? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Blake?
Yeah, to suggest that nobody's been working on that, I think is not quite true. Colorado Fiscal Institute, there are a whole bunch of people that have been doing studies on how to do this and exploring that, working with the legislature in many ways. So that's not a new issue and not an issue that has not been addressed. I think we're all trying to look at it, trying to find it legally. It's been a challenge, but there are a lot of people working on it, and I think we need to find more people in the legislature that are willing to take it on as well. But to suggest that nobody's doing it, I think is unfair.
All I can say is that I'm not a legislator. All I can say is I haven't seen the repeal Tabor amendment floated to the public. And I haven't seen the repeal Gallagher. I think John wants to talk.
Jim Chaney?
Yeah, wasn't there a ballot initiative a few election cycles ago for a rainy day fund, and it was soundly defeated, like 60-40?
I think that part of the reason that people, that there's an amendment against Gallagher and not against Tabor is Tabor's going to be harder because people don't trust the legislature. And and there is an inherent distrust. That's why Tabor passed to begin with. And so, I think I don't remember that specific initiative. I wouldn't doubt that that's the case, but I think that you have to assume that people that the powers that be assume that Gallagher is more doable. The repeal of Gallagher is more doable than the repeal of Tabor, right? Even though the last time they tried it went down 80-20.
Okay, Blake and then John.
Yeah, the structure of Tabor is the problem, and it was built in. It's in the Constitution at this point. It was passed with a provision. It was passed with a dozen intertwined conditions, and one of the conditions because they built it into Tabor.
Yeah.
So that's why there is no intent to get rid of Tabor, because the Constitution says you can't. So the pieces that we're trying to do are pieces around that. And they're difficult to do because the way it was built, it intertwined pieces that you can't do, that you can only do now one at a time. And that's a constitutional problem. That's something that we're not going to get rid of. And that's why we have to do this one base at a time instead of home runs.
John?
So I think we have to face the fact that we live in a red to orange state, and that it's almost impossible in this state to pass any kind of law that is progressive with regard to taxes. It will be very difficult to undo Tabor. I suspect that this amendment will be very difficult to pass because of that. People are willing to vote for a tax decrease or a tax limitation, and that's probably why Gallagher was able to be passed to begin with. Not because it was seen as a positive thing for homeowners, but because it was seen as a way to put shackles on the arms, on the ability of the legislature to do a progressive position on tax. It's going to be very difficult for us to change that unless we are able to really change the way the voters of the state of Colorado view taxation in general.
Lance?
So I think one of the points is that when Tabor was passed, there was not a single subject rule. And there are parts of Tabor, now there's a single subject rule. There are parts of Tabor that most Coloradoans like. For example, I think most Coloradoans, whether I agree or you agree or not, support the concept of a balanced budget. But if you do a repeal, it's all or none, including that piece of it. And the other parts of Tabor are so convoluted that when you talk about repealing Tabor, what people hear is we will no longer require having a balanced budget. And that's actually only a small part of Tabor. So I think that makes it extremely difficult to change because it's an all or none kind of deal. You can't repeal pieces of Tabor. You have to repeal the whole thing or none of it. And so I think that makes it virtually impossible to address. I think it makes it extremely difficult. And I think that people would like to do something to address the issues we face as a state. You know, we cut $3.2 billion out of the general fund last year. This year, our legislature is probably going to have to cut another $3 billion out of the general fund. Part of the problem is that as our general fund money decreases over time, and as certain parts of the general fund are eaten away at, they're required because they're entitlements, like Medicaid, for example. As Medicaid, as that number increases, it eats away more of the general fund dollars. Our budget this year was about $30 billion, $29 billion. Of that, we really only had any influence over, I think it was roughly 11 or $12 billion. When you cut 3.2 out of that, you're talking about some serious cuts. And so what happens is Amendment 23, all that money goes into what's called the negative factor. Last year, the plan before the pandemic was to reduce the debt we owed schools by $100 million. Of course, that didn't happen. And we now, after this year, probably will have about $1 billion of Amendment 23 money that we're going to owe to the schools. So, it's a very complicated issue. And I think with this particular amendment or this particular approach, to do something about Gallagher, I think people just want to do something. They want to do anything to try to address this fiscal policy kind of issue. And I think that makes it, that makes this amendment kind of attractive for people. I'm just saying, and I'm here to learn. I certainly don't have all the answers on Gallagher, and I hear your perspective on it. I guess I think it would be helpful for us to invite Chris Hansen to come and talk about the other side of this issue, because I think there are two sides of this issue, and I think it's a very challenging discussion. So anyway, that's my more than a nickel's worth.
And just so you know, I'm personally learning so much about Tabor from you all today, and I don't claim to be a tax expert on this. Denver Decides, Channel 8 is doing a debate that will have Chris and I talking about the different sides of this. That's going to be filmed. Listen to me, filmed. I'm dating myself on that with that term, but we're going into the studio next week, and then we'll be playing on Denver Decides. So you'll have an opportunity to hear both sides of that. The one thing I would just also note is that looking at a graph from the Division of Property Taxation, and total statewide property taxes have increased from about $7 billion in 2009 to just a smidge under $11 billion in 2019. So, we have seen a significant uptick in just the total amount that has been raised through all property taxes over the last 10-year period of time. And as I think it was John noted, your taxes continue to go up because the valuation on your homes continue to go up. And so that's part of this also.
Anyone else?
I just want to thank all of you for giving me a chance to talk today, and for teaching me as well. Blake and Lance and Everett, and John, you've all brought up parts of Tabor that, rattle around in my head. And, obviously I don't have the answer, and I keep looking for our elected officials to have the answer. And maybe there's not one there. But I just get stuck in, there's a period of time that you can go to homeowners to get taxes and to get that extra revenue. I just can't see how in 2020 that's the time to do this.
Okay. Clay, thank you so much for sitting with us this morning. It's been very, very informative.
Thank you all. And
come back anytime.
I appreciate it. And nooonamendmentb.com is our website. If you have any other questions, you can leave me an email there, and I'll do the best that I can and reach out to the people who advise me if I don't have the answers. Thank you all. I'm gonna let you go talk about me now. So thanks so much.
Thanks, Clay.
Happy New Year.
Yeah.
Catherine?
Well, I just wanted to say that I had some biscotti from Bakery Trampeau instead of Abe's vegan muffins this morning.
Very high end.
The Boulangerie Trampeau.
I think Catherine was trying to raise her hand.
Catherine. No.
The mute is off, but it's not working.
Yeah, but she was having trouble last night with her mic.
Helen had her hand up.
Helen, turn your mic off. There
Actually,
you go.
applauding our last speaker.
Yeah. Lance?
So if it's okay with folks, I really would like to try to get a hold of Senator Hansen and ask him to come and speak to the other side of this issue, because I think it's it's a challenging issue, and there's a lot of nuance about it. And I think it would be helpful for us to hear both sides of the issue. And I think while it's helpful to watch a debate on TV, I think it's also helpful for us to be able to ask tough questions of both sides of this issue.
Yeah, Lance, I really appreciate you doing that. Bill, you had a question?
Yeah, one thing going down in the blue book on the upcoming election, proposition, 116 is a proposed cut to the income tax. So we're talking about property tax as a way of funding the state budget and so forth. But that one, have you done any discussion on that? I came in a little bit late, but what's the feeling on that?
Everett?
Yeah, I've looked into this a little bit, and the way it works, the cut would be like $70 for the people on the call, but for people that have $1 million incomes, the cut is substantial.
Ruth?
Just in case you didn't get your sample ballot yet, you will any day, and it'll show you how Central Committee of the Denver Democratic Party voted. And on the Prop 116 state income tax rate reduction, Central Committee voted no and encourages everybody to vote no on that. I think Everett makes a very good point. Once again, this overwhelmingly advantages the wealthiest among us, and by a cut in services will hurt those who can least afford it.
Yeah.
Who promoted that 116? Is that a Republican thing?
I don't know. I'm looking at the.
I think it's an Independence Institute thing. I think it's Caldera.
Well,
placed on the ballot by citizen initiative. That's all it says in here. I guess that's what it says for most of them. Sorry.
Blake, you had a question?
Yeah, I have a question for the group. All these issues we talk about, how we demonize taxes every time we do one of these things. We talk about reducing taxes for everybody, and somehow the people that need help most aren't paying taxes. And so what we keep getting are these kinds of programs to try to say, well, reduce taxes. And then we look at whose taxes get reduced and the lack of funding to do the things that help the other people. And so it just seems to me that we keep shooting ourselves in our foot when we, as Democrats, use the anti-tax conversation to go after any kind of a program. And so I just think that we're digging ourselves deeper and deeper into a hole when that's what we don't want to have our ox gored, but somehow we don't pay much attention to the people that need the help and need the support. And so I just philosophically, it just seems to me that we keep adopting the wrong view of how we approach all of these issues that we're talking about.
Okay, Al Binford and then Owen.
I just saw by accident that Ruth Clevenger is the Democratic Party Volunteer of the Year, and I think she should accept congratulations from this group.
Bravo, bravo.
Thank you.
Yeah. Owen?
Any excuse for a party.
Owen, turn your mic on.
See.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Pam? Pam, turn your mic on.
Is it on?
Go. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. It makes me very nervous. First time caller. Anyway, my thoughts about all this conversation about, because I'm not anti-tax in any way, shape or form, because, luckily, it helped pay for my education growing up. But one of the things, the way I look at, and I don't know how it could be formulated, if people don't want to pass change tax because they don't trust politicians. One of the things I do, because I understand that the government has limited funds to donate to different things, and I'm an avid animal lover, so I donate to the Denver shelter for animals. It's something that I donate products and money, and I do it to actually 6 dog shelters because I care about them. So when I get my tax refund, though it's not huge or large in any respect, but I look at that as an opportunity to transfer money into the things that I support and I believe in. Couldn't we look at the government as almost like an organization that people could be encouraged to use their refunds, which are forced by Tabor, and channel it into whatever it is, and have the choice that I'm going to take my refund. And for me, I don't want to give it, maybe if trust is the issue, to a representative to determine where that money goes. Why couldn't I make the decision? Because I tell them at that shelter, I say, the reason I give you money is it's for these animals, because I have a very, I just believe this way. And people could choose to use their refunds if they could channel it and know that it was only going to be spent in a certain way. And then that way, wouldn't that be more representative of what we believe in? Because we all feel very strongly whether, and I'm not saying there aren't 1,000 other issues that are important, but the conglomerate, if we could create a conversation and a way for because I don't know that I could walk over and say, here's $1,000 to the Department of Education and know that it just went to the Department of Education. But I think it could be done because that's what I choose to do with my money.
Ruth?
Doesn't the refund come to you?
Well, the refund on your taxes, like your state refund, whatever you get. And because of Tabor, we're not paying. My money would stay with the state and would be used if we didn't have Tabor. I would probably pay more, but because of the Tabor amendment, most years I get something back, but it's a way of giving people that actually would get bigger sums back, that get a bigger tax rebate because of Tabor, that they could look at it as a way, if the state, city, county could say, we are setting up funding and we guarantee that you take this. If you don't feel like you can trust the Senate and the Congress to determine where these funds go, I want mine allocated only to education.
Ruth?
So Pam, I don't think it's an either or. I think that there have been in the past in the tax code, some of it's changed recently, but incentives for people to donate money to the charities, causes of their choice. But the whole reason we pay taxes and we have a government is to be able to provide what economists call social goods, the big things, education, infrastructure, military, national parks. not all of us are going to agree with how much money is going to any particular thing. I would like to reallocate a whole lot of money from the military to other causes. But I don't think that private contributions based on the whim of any individual's pet project is any kind of a substitute for a functioning government.
Absolutely not, but we're stuck, right? And there isn't a Tabor Amendment adjustment that's going to happen this year, and it doesn't sound like, based on what anybody said, that's very realistic at this point. But to get people to actually recognize if they have additional money and they want to dictate where their government sends it, and yes, I give to charities that are not related to the city of Denver or the state of Colorado. But if I want to give money to a specific cause that goes to a state program that may or may not be funded by state money, but if it is funded by state money, I could channel money that way. And I could be encouraged to do it that way. And then because I wouldn't give money necessarily to more military, I wouldn't do that, because that's not something that I would do. But somebody that chooses to do that, and it could, if education says we need this much money to build this, and the taxes aren't going to cover it, we need donations, and because of, explain the fact, the limitations that these things, the Gallagher, the Tabor are restricting on people, and allow them to channel into public money, to make it public money, take it out of that and make it public again.
Okay, Catherine just made a very good point, which I'm going to make for her since her mic's not working, but she said we don't want to confuse income tax refunds with Tabor refunds.
But it is a reduction of what we pay based on the fact of how it structures our taxation. If our housing taxes, and definitely my taxes on my house have gone up 3 times, I guess, since I bought it. But if I wanted to, and that allows me to get some sort of, well, not anymore because I don't have a mortgage, but when it did, but it's just the reallocation of funds, wherever they come from. And yes, it would be wonderful, but it doesn't sound like it's going to happen. It just doesn't sound like people can understand the complexities of it enough and trust the government enough to make those changes.
Okay. Great. Well, I'm really glad we had the opportunity to talk to Dennis and Clay this morning. I think it was helpful, provided us with lots more questions. And hopefully Chris can come next week. Yeah, and we will not let it fall into a black hole, I promise you. Anybody else?
Well, again, I would just encourage everybody to read the summary from the Colorado Fiscal Institute that I sent around this morning.
Yes.
Because I think lay out the case, and they've got charts and graphs and numbers, and it shows you who's going to pay, how much, and when Clay throws around these big aggregate numbers, when you actually break it down and you see who that affects and how, it gives you a different perspective.
Right, I agree with you. Yeah,
and I would like to look forward to hearing the other side of the argument also.
Yep. Lance is on it. Owen?
From the Colorado Fiscal Institute. I think that's what I sent.
Right. Okay, guys. Well, another morning well spent. Thank you very much. We'll do this again next week.
Thank you, Candy, and thank you, folks, for all those links.
Thanks.
Stay well.
Okay.
Thanks, Lance. Thanks, Candy.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.